Okay, we're recording. Okay, so this is the first, this is kind of like the main overview from the proposal. Does everyone have access to a copy of the proposal somewhere? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So basically, it's separated into 4 tasks. I think the first 2 are the most complex, as you can see here. But really, what this comes down to in task 1 is looking at the 2 main classification approaches, both updating the current code to random forest and probably trying to make it more generalizable to different regions. It looks like it is doing fairly well, but I've noticed as move up to high latitudes, you can get more errors. And then also looking at a convolutional neural network. There's some kelp species assessments, which we've been talking about for years, which is trying to either use the canopy data in a single time point or through time to, kind of separate bull kelp and giant kelp and maybe other species of kelps as well. And then those go to create this global map of kelp dynamics, which is kind of the main data product from the paper. And then from there, kind of these subtasks in task 2, we'll look at the regional environmental drivers, and this kind of follows a lot of the work we've been doing over the past X number of years, which is kind of relating dynamics either on a quarterly or annual scale to changes in temperature, seawater nutrients, waves, herbivore data where we have it, but kind of looking at these like larger scale environmental drivers and how we can characterize and develop these, potentially like nonlinear relationships with each one, which will feed into task 4. We also want to characterize long-term trends. This can be as simple as looking at long-term like linear trends through time. Do we see areas that have just kind of really been declining over the past, 35 to 40 years? But also a big part of this that I think is really interesting is looking at low frequency climate oscillations. I think we've seen evidence of that in almost every region we've looked at, that these can be very important, and also relating them to one another and kind of looking at, because all of these, they're all teleconnections. They're all kind of related to each other in weird ways. So, if we see, like, I'll go into this more, but like we saw ENSO effects in like Tierra del Fuego, and then Henry, you were looking at that another, which one were you looking at? The circumpolar
southern annular mode, I think.
Southern annular mode, right?
About, yeah.
And it may, all these indices really don't mean all that much, right? They're just, modes pulled out of like spatial data, right? So they may be related to one another or lag one another by a certain time. So maybe trying to put some, trying to identify how different regions are kind of oscillating synchronously or asynchronously and what that might mean. Task 3, these are the resistance, resilience analysis kind of following Kyle's paper in 2019. We could really focus in here on climate change and heat waves if we want to. I think there's some obvious papers there. And then task 4, which I guess is kind of the main overall point of the proposal, at least what we said it was, which is not just creating a global map, but looking at vulnerability to climate change. And so this is definitely the most kind of out there, part of the proposal, but, using the information, the environmental relationships we find in task 2, and maybe the response to temperature we see in task 3 to look at global climate models going forward, both for temperature and nitrate and maybe waves, to see where do we expect kelp to be doing well by 2100, where do we expect it not to really be at all in 2100. We could look at range shifts, just kind of see what the data tells us there. And again,
have you done much work looking at like oceanographic projections? Like what, I mean, does like the CMIP program, do they provide sea surface temperature and kind of those
They
kinds
do.
of upwelling predictions? Okay.
They do. So CMIP, I think I made a figure with CMIP 5 data
Got it.
for this, but I think CMIP 6 is out or maybe out
Yeah,
soon.
they just released that. Or yeah.
And that has sea surface temperature or temperature, ocean temperature, and nitrate.
It does have nitrate.
Yeah,
like
well,
globally.
at least CMIP 5 did. Yeah.
Okay.
On a kind of seasonal time scale. So these are the main tasks kind of written out in word form, right? So, again, developing machine learning approaches for mapping kelp canopy. And machine learning is kind of open here, both kind of machine learning classifier type sense, which we've been doing already, but kind of making those better, hopefully. And also really identifying the constraints. We've worked a bit on, what is the minimum detection value for our classifier? It's probably between like 15 and 20% coverage of canopy. Like, is there a way to drive it down more? Or is that kind of like a hard constraint with Landsat data? We're just never going to get below. And then also, working with the floating forest data or classifications to get at a machine learning, different type of convolutional neural network. So kind of like computer vision way of looking at these imagery. And I've looked at a few papers recently. And I think this approach may be, and some of the work Hackai's done too, has shown some kind of positive results from this. And I do think there's a way to even combine them too, which I was thinking about the other day. Task 2, identifying the environmental variables that drive regional kelp dynamics, characterize long-term trends. Task 3, examine the resistance and resilience, look at temperature effects. How is there a hard, Kyle found that there's a hard temperature threshold, it looks like, for giant kelp. Do we see similar temperature effects for other species? Or are when we relate heat waves, or what people think of as warm water effects on kelp, are some of these not actually temperature effects, but low nitrate effects? And then task 4, predicting the global distribution under different climate change scenarios. And the good thing about the CMIP data is they have, different future scenarios. So business as usual, we can do worst case, we could look at best case, or we like turn off carbon emissions tomorrow or the next 10 years, and see if that affects anything. So just a real quick overview of each task. I went back through the proposal and kind of pulled out the important tasks, like subtasks for each one. And for task 1, I kind of put these into 3 groups. And the beginning, the random forest classifier and fully integrating the processing code in the Google Earth Engine and automating our coastal land masking procedure is probably the one I'm most familiar with. And I think we've made a lot of headway on this already. So Henry's going to talk a bit about the Google Earth Engine work he's been doing and scripting, taking it from JavaScript to Python. I think updating it to random forest is going to be fairly straightforward, but there's going to be some questions we have along the way about how do we want to, I think we should look at these regionally and then also try to find a generalized method. It seems like the binary decision tree works well in different parts of the world already, but it might lead to some errors in other parts of the world, especially parts where we don't have all of the seawater types characterized well. I'm currently working on automating our coastal land masking procedure. I think we've got a good path forward with combining our old DEM approach for land masking with our MNDWI, or Modified Normalized Difference Water Index, for identifying these intertidal areas that aren't captured by the DEM. And I'm working out a way to try to automate that so we don't have to kind of do that manually for each, or semi-manually for each Landsat scene.
What's the for this first one, the random forest approach? What do we think about MESMA? Like, do we want to try to apply it, or is that just kind of complicate things as we get into different areas, like we've seen in Washington?
Well, I think we should look at it because it may be important for species determination.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a good point, because
I just think of like other, like the same issues I feel like could be or are existing in all the other kind of global Landsat maps that have been made, whether it's salt marsh or mangroves or coral reef, and all of those are just kind of thematic. It's like a lot simpler to just say, okay, we're going to make, like, as a first cut, we'll make a thematic map. So like for just simplicity and transferring among regions, I feel like there's some benefit of just doing that, but kind of like you said too, we know that especially with kelp, it's actually probably rare that the canopy covers the entire 900 square meter pixel. So we know that there's problems there. So I don't know. I don't. But I like, maybe, like you said, maybe kind of doing both, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we should investigate it in both ways. I think it is rare that we're ever going to get complete canopy coverage, especially with species that aren't giant kelp.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like 30 meters is actually a pretty small pixel when you think about it on a global scale, right?
Yeah.
So just identifying where the kelp is, and we also know that it's, especially when you look over larger scales, the dynamics really aren't driven by changes in density, right?
We've already looked at area. Totally. So, I also worry that we're just more sensitive to, radiometric issues in terms of, brightness through space and time, or even the selection of that end member. Just like it adds some uncertainty that I think could get kind of tricky.
Yeah. And in most of the Alaska work I've been pushing forward, I've kind of moved away from I've done MESMA for everything, but the analysis is more on a presence absence basis.
Yeah.
And
it's easier to explain.
Yeah.
I was going to say, with a lot of the things like what I've been doing, the MESMA is almost like a cleanup procedure, because the distribution of all of my classified pixels, it's only really the smallest tail of the histogram that's getting trimmed out by MESMA.
And for your Falklands paper, you didn't use the fractional coverage, right? You just used the binary classifier.
Yeah, so MESMA was just sort of getting rid of the pixels that were mostly water.
It's also, not hard to add back in, and it kind of makes sense maybe to do MESMA regionally with either regional end members, or just to help address some of that uncertainty for areas where you might need to know biomass, right? If you wanted to get to biomass for some management or harvesting application. But I guess I would argue for like doing this first global map. Just let's make it a binary thematic map. We can always add that in later.
It would also decrease the data size quite a
bit. Yeah. I doubt we're gonna get people like, hey, you need to give us sub-pixel fraction
on a global scale, right?
People are just gonna be like, the easier we can make this to use, and people are just gonna be excited about the global data set, and like we said, changes through time are driven by area. Like, I'd push for that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's why we keep you around, Kyle.
It's a big change, but I like that.
You're good at these, like, very, like, hey, what are we doing? This is way too complicated. Get the hell out of here. Well, you're the one who is going to have to ditch MESMA, because you're the one that started it all.
I know. That's why I've been holding back for so long. But I think it's time. I think it's time to put it aside.
Put it to bed. Put mesma.
It's done. It's done good for us, but let's put it aside.
Yeah, I know. God, after the last few weeks, I've been. Oh, well, and that kind of leads us to, well, I guess, did I talk about this more? Let me see. Yes, I do. So let me just go into the next slides. So, Henry's going to update us on his work with Google Earth Engine and advancements he's made. I kind of went over this already, but random forests, should we include, we need to include regional differences in kelp and seawater data, right? So we're still using the same classifier that was developed on just the Santa Barbara scene, right? And that's what we've used.
All the way up to Alaska.
All the way to Alaska. And actually I made an Alaska classifier, but I hadn't really, early days, and I've ended up using the Santa Barbara. We use the Santa Barbara one for the Tierra del Fuego stuff. We use Santa Barbara one for the Oregon stuff, for all of Kelp Watch, and then Henry's used it as well. So, I found in Alaska that there's a lot of speckle that happens in certain areas, especially in like fjord areas, that we'll have to figure out and address. And I'm hoping that the random forest will take care of that, as long as we bring in some of the training data for this. Maybe I'm thinking it might be different water types. It might be other stuff that's just floating on the water. When I did a lot of field work up there, sometimes there's a lot of stuff floating.
Sure.
I think we really need to investigate, our detection limit. I've done this a bit over the past couple of years with some of the drone matchups we've done, but, is there a way to drive down that detection limit to below 15 to 20%? Can we, because we found that Mesma actually does a pretty good job at pulling apart the sub-pixel fractions better than we thought. The challenge is, at least with Mesma, is that it is prone to a lot of false positives, and that's where the classifier helps us out a lot. But it'd be great to try to really hammer out, at the very least, put a hard limit and understand why we can't get below certain canopy cover fractions with Landsat. And we may need to use Mesma there to try to help define those. But I think that's important. And like I said, I'm working on the land masking code. So this is in my mind, at least for task one, and maybe for the whole project, one of the biggest unknowns about who's going to kind of tackle this and how we're going to do it. So I think that there's a lot of promise in using convolutional neural networks to identify areas of canopy. This could be a completely independent and separate approach that we use independent of the random forest classifier. Or we could even think about pairing it. And one potential way to think about this is, if, in the early days of this work, we used to run Mesma on an entire scene, and then we'd have a room of undergrads, circling the kelp canopy, and then, removing all the Mesma errors, right? And is there a way to potentially use the convolutional neural network to kind of do what the undergrads were doing, which is basically identify these areas of kelp, and then pair that with the random forest to try to eliminate misclassifications. And that, I think that would only, now that we're talking about potentially ditching Mesma for the making, it might matter less, because we don't necessarily, one of the things that I was thinking about with the convolutional neural network is, well, we'll only get the area, but we won't get the density of each pixel because it'll pretty much give us like a thematic map. But if we're only after a thematic map, maybe these can be more independent. We don't have to like really pair them at all. And we could also investigate its use to determine species. So one of the limitations, at least we've had so far with doing the classifications and MESMA is, since we're looking at everything kind of at an individual pixel scale, we haven't looked at like groups of pixels and how that may relate to different species of kelp. One of the things I've kind of noticed is, nereoforests tend to be a lower overall canopy fraction. That's probably due to the canopy morphology of bowl kelp versus giant kelp, where bowl kelp is just going to have a lot less, surface area of tissue off the surface of the water than giant kelp is. Could we train the convolutional neural network to, not only identify kelp, but also identify the species of kelp? And there's some training data sets we may be able to use for that. Both the Washington data, which does have polygons which differentiate between the species, as well as high resolution worldview imagery that we have through NASA. And I've already set up an account with the project to look at some of these high resolution data.
Is it pretty easy to get access to those with NASA? Have they made that easier? It used to be a nightmare.
Yeah. So now there's a whole web interface, right?
Okay.
And you can kind of like search for the data with like the worldview like web interface. Yep. And you basically just email this one guy your project number and your name and everything, and they'll give you a password.
Cool.
To download the data. It's no longer the days, I think, of them, mailing you an internal hard drive that you have to find a tower to plug it in.
Okay, cool.
Species determination, kind of went over this before, but here are two drone images, one of giant kelp and bull kelp, as well as time series of what these two species kind of look like, at least time series in Southern California for giant kelp. So you can see that one, having a perennial versus annual species, you can kind of pull those time series apart pretty easily. The big challenge, I think, is finding is when you get into areas of high wave exposure with giant kelp, it may start to look like an annual species. But, we've kind of served the data as quarterly data, but I do think there's a lot of power in looking at when you first start to see canopy in the year, kind of looking at the kind of monthly or image date phenology. Typically you start to see canopy from giant kelp earlier in the year than you do for nereo, even in areas where they both are in wave exposed areas, which I think can be helpful. And like I said, you tend to see lower pixel fractions for bull kelp than you do for giant kelp overall. We also know our rough geographic ranges for these species. We know there's areas where they mix. We have access to high resolution imagery, both with worldview, with some of the Washington imagery, which hopefully we'll get actual imagery for as well. I have some Alaska drone imagery we can look at, and then Kate is currently getting some imagery right now. So
drones in the air.
And Kate, I think this kind of feeds directly into what Kate's doing, and so
I'm so sorry I signed on late. Kyle, thank you for texting me.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, Kate's got this JPL fellowship. I think it's 3 years, and this is the exact focus. So, and I think this has some good implications for SVG too, right? Maybe that's a long shot, but like, does the spectral resolution maybe combined with planet, like, if we can't get it from just SVG and Landsat, is there some way to combine this with higher resolution data to get there? So yeah.
And then I don't know. I'm just not as familiar with the planet data, but I don't know if there's a way to, or whether it's another. Kate, do you know of any? Are you optimistic about planet being able to tell the difference apart or between the species?
I'm not, but maybe as it improves potentially, I think like past data would be a little tough, but I don't know. I feel like there's a couple different things we can try that similar to Landsat, maybe we'll be able to get at it. But I think it's going to be tough to do like spectral relationships like you guys did with Mesma with Planet, just because it's so messy.
And spatially, like just it's still like spatially, you still just see.
Yeah, you can like I think I just resent it to Kyle and Tom. I sent it to you a while ago, and I was like, oh, this bed up in Oregon, why is it lasting the entire year? Like as you see it regrow, like it could be a mixed bed, and you really can't tell what's what.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that specific question ever since you asked me about it, and I look at that bed all the time, and could very well be a macro bed up there. Seems to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And then again, we kind of went over this. Could we develop a separate classifier model to is there a way to classify these on the fly between different species, or is this something where is this something that we can take a single image of a region and say, these are macro beds, these are Nereo beds? Or is this something where we'll have to develop a model that uses a time series of images through, and look at the phenology to really say, like, this is most likely a Nereo bed, this is most likely a macro bed. Mm-hmm. And I think these are some questions we should look at, and especially because some beds may change through time. But that may be something we can't do. We can't say this year it's a Nereo bed, this year it's a macro bed. Rather than saying these areas are usually Nereo beds, these areas are usually macro beds. Task 2, the first thing is to produce these global maps of kelp canopy dynamics, and to start to prepare them, not necessarily submit them at first, but start to understand how we want to get what kind of data formats and how we want to do we want to chop up the data? I mean, I think we will at some point, either regionally or by multiple degrees of latitude and longitude when we submit them to NASA data repositories. Or, are these going to be hosted directly by NASA, or is this going to be hosted through another data repository that's linked to NASA? These are questions we'll have to ask, and that'll probably be in close communication with some of the NASA data repository people. And then also, keep it in the back of our minds that there's a possibility that a lot of these data are going to end up on Kelp Watch at some point. And then the real kind of science here is to investigate the environmental drivers of kelp dynamics globally. And so we have a lot of prior work where we've done this with GAMs. I think that's supposed to say LMs, linear models, I don't know what an LIM, it's probably something, but I've never used it. Or GLMs or something like that, statistical models. Or are there other ways we can investigate how kelp canopy dynamics are driven by or associated with environmental drivers? And this is a paper that I'm particularly interested in, is investigating long-term trends and relationships with low frequency climate oscillations. And I went into a bit about that before, but in every region we've looked at so far, we've seen some sort of relationship on these long-term oscillations. And I think there's a lot of, there could be multiple papers that come out of that question. And already went over this. This is just some of our, previous work using GAMs to look at how environmental drivers are related to kelp dynamics. These were quarterly data. And luckily in California, we had pretty good data for waves and nitrate and some of these oscillations, and probably the best data you're going to get for urchin dynamics spatially. We still have ongoing work with this as part of a sea grant I'm in right now. We're kind of doing the same thing over again, but including Northern California. Meredith had a paper that looked at this in another way, Meredith McPherson with Northern California data. But the few things we need to do are, identify a good global wave model. I just put like Wave Watch 3. The more I've looked into it, the more I haven't found the data. But, maybe we might have to implement a model to run. And it's going to be a kind of a coarse resolution, right? We're not going to get like 100 meters sea dip wave models, right, along a coastline. Again, we're like very lucky working in California for that. But, I tried to put together a proposal for the South Africa like bioscape project, and there is just not good wave data in South Africa that I could find, or at least time series that you can go back to and look at. Another thing we'll have to look at is these regional temperature and nitrate relationships. Luckily, kelp in most of the areas we look at are going to be an upwelling system, so we can apply temperature to nitrate relationships, off South Africa, probably off Australia, definitely in California and Oregon. But there's some, as we get into higher latitude regions, we may have more of an influence of freshwater inputs, and these may not work quite as well. So that's something we need to look at for each separate region. And as we look at environmental drivers that we're going to get from satellite data, not all of the data are available for the entire time series. So if we, really want to look at how light is affecting, light at the bottom, kind of a mixture of both incoming radiation and irradiance and, the turbidity, that's not going to be available for the whole time series. So a lot of these things kind of start in the late 90s, early 2000s. Long-term trends, I've talked about this before. I think there's a couple really good papers out. This is just a figure we had from our second Tierra del Fuego paper, kind of showing the relationship between mean proportional kelp density. I think that was on the regional scale, and the ENSO index. We found a pretty strong relationship there. And you can kind of see, especially if you were to make this, I think these in B, these are trimesters, because it was really hard to get data for the whole year at these regions. But we did see these kind of cycles. And I think, Henry, you saw similar things in the Falklands. We've seen them in Oregon. We've seen them in all across California and Washington as well. So
actually, it was kind of interesting. We didn't see that in the Falklands, surprisingly.
Oh yeah, they were kind of, but what was it associated with? Nitrate?
Yeah, which was just our temperature, but that was an interesting twist where we were looking for it and not finding it.
Okay. Interesting. Wasn't there like was it a year lag with nitrate then that you saw?
Yeah.
Okay. I think ours was a year lag with ENSO, but nitrate was like the same year from our papers, I remember. Yeah, so it might be interesting to investigate how these different oscillations are related to one another, and then also kind of look at, are different regions of the world synchronous or asynchronous with each other, and how that may, do we tend to see kelp doing well in one part of the world and worse in the other part of the world? Does it switch? I imagine that you might see kelp do, you might see kelp do poorly in both South America and California at the same time, but in other parts of the world it may be different. Task 3, this is really kind of investigating the effects of climate change. And by climate change, I mean marine heat waves. And a lot of this can be done following some of the methods in Kyle's 2019 paper. I think there's some real low-hanging fruit in Australia and New Zealand. We should also look at how, are we seeing more heat waves around the world? I think we are. How is that affecting kelp in the past decade versus the previous 3? How, have we seen any recovery? So there's probably an easy paper coming up in California, assuming kelp continues to recover in Northern California. There's another, we've been talking about doing a follow-on paper to Kyle's 2019 paper, where it really kind of looks into resilience. So in Kyle's paper, we looked at resistance and resilience as a function of temperature. We saw that as temperature gets above a certain threshold, that the resistance of kelp just drops down to almost nothing, but that it wasn't as related, temperature wasn't as related to resilience. And so, my thought has been, is it the other direction? Is it like low temperatures or nitrate that's affecting resilience? And I think that's another easy paper we can kind of.
Is that something you think that's separate than this Kelp Watch one that we're currently working at? Like that's a little bit more in depth than the Kelp
I think
Watch?
It's in depth because the Kelp Watch one we're working on
just more descriptive.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, it doesn't go into too much analysis.
Fine.
And then task 4, kind of pulling everything together. So using the environmental driver dynamics and relationships we find in task 2, as well as investigating the role of heat waves and temperature in task 3, to kind of bring those together with future climate projections to kind of estimate, where do we expect rising temperatures to have the greatest impact on kelp? Do we expect, are there some regions of the world that may be getting warmer, but nitrate is also increasing? I pointed out one here in southern Chile where you see an increase in temperature, but also increasing nitrate. You can see, if you look at most of the world, most of the kelp containing areas are going to get warmer in A. In B, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of, I would say it looks like most of the areas are going to have a lot of areas are going to have less nitrate, but if you focus in on some of the regions where we see kelp, we don't see like a huge change in nitrate.
Do you know how this data, is this 3-dimensional ocean models that are trying to capture upwelling and so on?
Yeah. And they probably get a lot more uncertain the farther they go out.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But I think these are forward models. But yeah, I mean, this is, in my opinion, this is like the most out there and the most hand wavy. And there's going to be a lot of caveats and assumptions we're going to have to state here. But talking to the program manager, she seemed very interested in this.
Okay. Okay.
So someone's gonna have to bite the bullet, be the first author, and get it. And
I think this is cool, and I think there's ways to frame it where it's like you could, understanding that some of these projections might be the areas of big uncertainty, but like you could run scenario analysis where you're not just like totally dependent on these projections. You can say, identify thresholds that would be associated with big decline and so I think there's some cool stuff we could do here. I'm excited about this.
And another important thing to understand here, especially when you look at the temperature in the first figure here, that these are anomalies. So if we do find something like what I think seems to be one of the messages I pulled out of Kyle's 2019 paper, is it seems to be like there's some sort of physiological threshold for different species of kelp and temperature. And just because you see a 3, I think it's a, what are we at, like a 3 temperature anomaly off the coast of like Southeast Alaska is a 3 temperature anomaly actually crossing that physiological threshold for kelp. It may not get to 22 or 23 degrees off Southeast Alaska ever. It may, go from, what will we expect with temperature going from 12 to 15 degrees versus areas where it goes from 18 to 21 or something, right? And how does this affect different species? We may see a conserved temperature threshold across different kelp species, but it may be different for bull kelp as it is for giant kelp.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, this is the schedule we had. So we did technically kind of start right on time, even though we're kind of kicking off now, and I guess this would be the end of Q3, beginning of Q4, 2021. This isn't that informative, as it just kind of like puts the tasks in order, starting with the classification steps first. And, the problem with this proposal is that a lot of the analysis work may be, or a lot of the heavy lifting may be kind of front loaded, right? Where we have to develop these, and it all kind of depends on these global maps, right? So we got to get task 1 right and make the global map first, and then we can kind of focus on a lot of the analyses and publications. I have 3 publications on here. I think we'll probably have a lot more, but I just wanted to put some on. And I do think
it's a good point. There's going to be a lot of data set creation first before it really pays off big. Yeah.
So probably treating this like a tech startup for the first year.
Yeah.
A lot of tasks, and then once we get the data, then we can kind of crunch through it. But and then things will be working simultaneously. Kate's going to be working on her species stuff and continuing to push all her projects forward. I'll probably have some projects moving forward as well, mostly focusing on Southern California and another NASA grant I have. But and then Kelp Watch, I'm sure, will continue to eat up a lot of my time dealing with angry kelp managers. Cool. So sorry, that probably went over a bit. Definitely. Are there any questions people have on that part?
No, I think that was a great overview. I mean, I think that was a good overview. I think kind of the immediate next steps are to just kind of get into some of these technical details of how we want to start expanding these classifications in Google Earth Engine, and what we want to do on the neural network side of things. And so, one idea that we've been talking about is to try to kind of assign people different regions, like try to take this code that you've developed, that Henry's moved to Google Earth Engine with Kate, and everyone run that same code on a different region, like kind of find lessons learned and what needs to be adjusted, and then kind of check in regularly and try to build a global data set that way. It's just one suggestion. Rather than just having one person kind of responsible for, okay, go do the global data set, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be. I do like that approach of like everyone taking a region, maybe with the code we have.
Yeah.
And starting to at least a couple scenes in each region, right? And see what we can do and see where it's working and where it's not working.
Yeah.
And then, like I'll keep pushing forward on like Alaska and see identify the pain points, right? And then we can kind of move forward. I think, I can start working on a regional random forest and maybe put together like a methodology or like a cheat sheet on how to do it, like taking different, finding some images, a representative amount of images, and, classifying or manually classifying different types of water and different amounts. I found that when you find an image that has dense kelp, it's also going to have sparse kelp in it too.
Okay.
And finding a region that's has variable water types and variable kelp species, and exporting those spectral reflectance values that we can use for that we can bring into like a more generalized random forest training data set. Because I think with Google Earth Engine, we can't import we can't just like point it to a classifier like we did with the binary decision tree. I think my understanding with random forest is you have to kind of input the training data set and let Google Earth Engine develop the random forest from the same training data set, because it's hard to like export like a text file with a random forest like decision tree, like you could with a binary decision tree. Let me look at the agenda.
So yeah, to that end, I think on the agenda, Henry's gonna kind of talk about the code on GitHub and
Yep.
and maybe with an eye towards assigning us all some region for those of us that haven't done a lot of work in Google Earth Engine on this to get familiarized with the process and so on.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen and go to the GitHub repository. Most of the people on this call have already seen this, but I think this is new for Isaac. Cool. All right, so I'm looking at the repository right now. And I've spent some time filling out the README to provide installation instructions to get set up on your own machine. Because I think the goal is, like we were just saying, or Kyle was just saying, if we all have a region, everybody can go in and run this script for some area. And I've recently gotten it to a point where it's spitting out TIFFs. And so you can get it of your little zone. The TIFF has to be a lot smaller than a path row, or else it crashes the Earth Engine thing. At the top of the README file, I keep a to-do list so people can suggest things, and I'm kind of just going through them from top to bottom. Right now, I added in max canopy extent, which was a good suggestion Kyle made, but I immediately put a new bug in and broke it. So now that's the new thing on the to-do list, is to fix that bug. But anyways, if there's things that you would like it to be done and you don't want to contribute code directly, you can just add it to this README file and just put a new bullet on this list. These are the installation instructions, and I went through it with Kate, and I think it was pretty painless, surprisingly. We were both like braced for it to be really difficult and have all these problems, but Kate, I don't know if you agree, but it was a lot less bad than I thought.
No, it was pretty easy.
Cool. You need to have a whitelisted Google Earth Engine account, which I think probably everyone has on this call. And basically you set up an environment in your shell that basically stores your login credentials for Earth Engine. So then every time your Python code is going and asking for the data or using any of the Earth Engine code, it's continuously just re-logging you in with those same credentials. I'm running mine in Spider. That added a little bit of complexity because there was some compatibility issues. And the only reason I'm doing it is because I'm a new coder in Python, and Spider's like just like the MATLAB interface, so it made me feel, comfortable and warm. But I think in retrospect, if I had not tried to go down that path, it would have been easier. Because that was, I think, the only time when Kate and I were going through where you have to like downgrade parts of Spider to make things compatible with Earth Engine, because there's some things that don't quite work out. But I think if you look on the README, you can get it set up very easily. And also it's nice because I think eventually, I think this document should be like, if you have problems or whatever, everything should be on there. Anyways. When you get the code, pretty much all the heavy lifting is done by a set of 4 or 5 modules, so that most of the code is taken out of like the main script, so it isn't too busy. So are you guys with me?
Yeah,
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. For some reason, my browser is not.
Do you think if we went, I always wonder what the parts of the code that kind of are the most computationally expensive and may crash Google Earth. And if we move to classifying and making these thematic maps rather than Mesma, do you think we'll be able to classify larger areas at a time?
A lot of the code is the Mesma code, but I don't think that's a lot of the computational weight. Or maybe I'm wrong. When I run the code, it goes through the Mesma portion pretty easily. I don't know how I have, okay, here we go, I'm back. I was gonna say, I don't know how I can make a Zoom call, but I can't load a GitHub website. Anyways, okay, so this script, DTM_run, formerly DMT_run. This is the script that is the only one you have to interact with. Everything else is behind the scenes, but most of the code is in these other scripts that start with mod_. This is where, like for example, everything in Mesma is in this module. So you don't have to interact with it, it'll just pull from it as appropriate from the other file. But if you're trying to like follow the code and figure out what's going on, there's almost nothing that happens in the main script except for calling from these other modules.
Is this so if we decide to move forward without the Mesma, I mean, I'm wondering, do we need to make any changes if we're not going to use the Mesma fractions, or does it matter just ignoring the fractions and at the end converting it all to ones and zeros? I guess that would be the easiest, huh?
Well, for right now, we can really easily just do some diagnostics when we want to by just setting the Mesma threshold to 0. But then later to fix this code, if we choose not to use Mesma, that's also really easy. I don't
Cool.
think,
Cool.
Yeah, that'll be super easy to implement. All of the output.
Sorry, one last question. Does this code does it only use Mesma as a filtering device, or does it actually output the Mesma fractions for each pixel?
It can give you the fractions or the presence absence based on a Mesma threshold.
Okay.
All of the files get written into this output directory. First, this is probably really obvious, but one really easy way to get is just to go to the code thing and just download a zip and then work within that directory on your computer. But everyone probably has like their own preferred way of working with the GitHub stuff. Everything will get written in the output. What's getting written out now is you get a bunch of TIFF files that are more than we'll be generating later just because it helps with diagnostic stuff right now. So for example, I print out a TIFF of like all of the MESMA fractional coverage. Before that, I print out, I don't print out a classification TIFF. The first thing I get is the MESMA fractional coverage TIFF, and it's just, basically values from 0 to 300 or above. And if you wanted to look at the classification, you would just, look at anything that was, I think, like not a man in this TIFF, or maybe greater than 0. You get a TIFF of the presence absence after each of the post-processing steps that I've done to kind of clean it up, or to try to reduce the file size so that we're not moving a ton of data. And I also wrote out a TIFF of like a pseudo-color image so that we can put the classification on and we can look at it and see if it makes sense. They're kind of primitive right now, so when you first get them, they're just going to be like a bunch of TIFF files and not that handy. And I also am printing out a CSV of the kelp mean and seasonal maximum for within the path row. If that's easier to look at, and I think I print out something like a PNG file or something of a time series. Right now, I've just introduced this new bug, and those last two items are all zeros. But I think it'll be an easy bug to fix because it's one of those ones where I can't even figure out how is that going to mess up the code when I added like 4 lines. Anyways, I'm just going to walk you through how you would run this on your computer. So I'll fix the bugs, I'll send out a message, and then maybe what we want to do is at that point, people could choose a region and go look at a site and see how it's working once I've ironed that out. Basically, this is a toggle that controls whether to print out like the majority of the TIFFs, and you probably, you may or may not want to run that because you'll still get TIFFs of kind of the final product, but this helps maybe like if it was a title filter, or it was like me trying to get rid of data that didn't have, regions that didn't have any data in it or something like that. So this one causes a lot more TIFFs to get printed out. This line needs to be uncommented the first time you run. This is what will take you to Google Earth Engine and prompt you to give it credentials, and it'll store those for you for future runs. And then going forward, you don't have to do that again. It'll save it so that you can just keep running this thing. It's pretty straightforward. Right now, I'm only processing Landsat 5. I think that'll be an easy thing to implement, but first I'm trying to like fix the bugs and get this one out, and then I'll add in 7 and 8. All of the module files are written to include 5, 7, and 8, so most of that work's done. And what I'm doing right now is I'm processing it by path row. So here's a region I was looking at in Chile. And then the TIFFs that are getting written out need to be significantly smaller than the path row. So I focused in on an area that looked really interesting from looking at the imagery outside of this. So this is this place called Point Conception that I think I've probably showed in some of our other meetings or stuff, and looked at what the output was looking like in that area. So I just print out this very tiny area rather than the full path row. And right now I also give it some projection information because I haven't. I mean, that's
is that just for the TIFF output, or is that for all the calculations, the actual time series output of maximum extent?
The projection information?
No, sorry, the AOI, like the smaller AOI.
Sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. The AOI is just for the TIFF outputs. I thought we could look at a place that maybe we know really well, or it's like easy imagery to compare for us visually, and start there.
Okay.
So It's basically just the difficult thing is getting from, there was like two options. There's either run it in Colab, and then it's really easy to move things into Drive. But there were other problems with that. Or run it on our own machine or in a cloud Python environment or something like that. And everything is smooth, except it's a little bit harder to get the data out. So this is how I have it set up now. And there's a branch, I don't think I made it public, but there's a branch in the GitHub that also does it if you were going to set it up with Colab. Anyways, most of the time that this script takes to run is that process of writing out these TIFFs. So like, for example, doing that diagnostic thing where I'm printing out all the TIFFs of like every step, that just explodes the computational time. Without that, it runs really quickly. At the top, I just have the things that are basically constant in the script, and I try to use all caps for those, so we can play with those as appropriate, or for a lot of them, we'll be getting rid of them because maybe they're like left over from how we were doing things before. That's on the top. And then basically from here down for a bit, it's the same as the script that Kate and Tom had in the JavaScript, but it's just that most of the things that are in that section are actually in the modules. So you're not really seeing them here. I thought it would just be cleaner. And then all these spots you see are the spots where it's writing out a TIFF. So like right here, this is writing out a TIFF for the fractional coverage stuff. I don't know if people want me to go through this or not, because maybe it's easier just to run it and look at the output. Or maybe, I don't want to waste everyone's time and go through the Python code, but basically it does what JavaScript did, and then it applies the post-processing things that I was doing in MATLAB separately. And then it goes through and does the time series analysis, which is the part that's not working right now.
Yeah, I think this is totally awesome. Thank you. So I would suggest that that we decide on each person gets a region and they try it on a couple path rows from that region, and then we have like a date where the next meeting we focus on just kind of like sharing preliminary findings, and with everyone familiar with running the code and the type of outputs, we can also start to talk about details of like how do we organize all of this data, like how do we things like stitching path rows into larger regions and how to deal with all that. And ideas for adjusting or improving this. So I think the thing to do now is all of us to get in, test it out, and then come back, and then we have another meeting that's just dedicated to kind of talking about this.
One thing is that this, just in case this wasn't clear, the area that I made much smaller, this is like computationally expensive to make these TIFFs and stuff, but this is all just for like visual inspection.
Right.
And anytime we're scaling up and we're not producing those TIFFs, it actually can do really large areas and not hesitate, on my local machine, for example. So
can it do areas larger than a path row?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe so.
To do that, would we, like the input as a path row, would you just input like a array of path rows, or is it something where you can put in coordinates or something, like, you know what I mean? Like,
so I think a good thing to do would be to basically, right now it's grabbing all the Landsat imagery and it's just subsetting it by path row.
Yeah.
I think a better thing to do is on my README file, I put this down. I think what would be great would be for us to develop like a like our own geometry that we actually want to process, because path rows are going to be giving us so much land and ocean.
Yeah.
So ideally, to be reading from, something that is not, a square, for example.
And that could just be a GeoJSON or whatever, like some kind of whatever we want.
Yeah.
It's a good.
Right now,
there you go. There you
go.
go.
Kind of down the to-do list, but it's on there. Yeah.
Cool.
I think that'll be better. I mean, we're trying to get rid of like processing these big grids of like ocean and land.
Yeah. So in terms of region, Henry, I'm guessing you'll do Chile.
Yeah, I would like to.
Kate will do
Um,
New Zealand. Tom's Southeast Alaska. Isaac, is there a area that you'd be interested in?
I do Tasmania if that's an option that we're looking at here.
You're not gonna do Massachusetts?
What else? What else do we think? What's left?
South Africa.
South Africa or BC? I guess South Africa. I'll do South Africa.
Or you can do Tristan da Cunha. Or maybe you could pick out a subantarctic island.
Yeah, like some of the other subantarctic islands.
South Georgia or something.
I'll try. We'll try South Africa, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, I think like when we're all doing this, the purpose won't be to like get to that. I mean, this is obvious. We're not trying to get to the global map, but it's like what isn't working right now, and what type of things are people running into that are like these problems are probably going to be like patterns. We're always going to have problems for certain things.
I'm sure I'll have problems from Southeast Alaska.
My first problem will be getting this to run on Windows, I'm sure. So that'll be fun.
Probably not. I don't know. Isaac, maybe you can contribute me some Windows specific installation instructions after you go through that. I think it should be pretty straightforward.
I'm probably just gonna, I have a Linux virtual machine that I would probably do that way anyway.
Yeah, Kyle, I saw you put Baja range limit. It's probably good for at least one of us to cover an area that we've covered before with the other stuff, just to like
exactly.
see
That's
how
what
if we're
what I
like
was
Do you want me
thinking.
to start with Baja then, Kyle, since I did that with the MATLAB version?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the smartest way. Like I've been playing around with it mostly using the same Falklands path row that has most of what I was looking at before, just so it'll be really obvious when things aren't working.
And I have a bunch of stuff done for Southeast Alaska that I can check against.
Great. This code isn't ready right now for what we're talking about, and I think I need about 2 weeks between a proposal working on and also classes starting. So if you plug and play right now, you're going to get a bunch of zeros.
Cool. So we'll wait for you sometime in early October to give us the green light.
All right. Thanks for everyone's patience.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for putting this together. This is really cool.
And I know that probably everyone who writes code says this stuff, but I tried to make the printouts pretty handy. You know, it's like all it should. If you're running it, all the like text outputs are things that I put in to help people debug or see what it's doing. So, you know, if you're paying attention to that, I think it'll be pretty intuitive what the code's doing. I think every coder thinks that about their code. So like, stupid things.
Okay.
Awesome. Should we move on to the next little update?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I think like, I mean, maybe we should talk about the other convolutional neural network approach. Just jump to that because I haven't been in the loop with Isaac, what you and Jarrett have done. I was just to throw this out there. I have a good chunk of money that I kind of need to spend in the next year or so, and so I was playing with the idea of hiring I don't know if it would be a postdoc, maybe like a machine learning postdoc, not necessarily someone that has any experience with kelp, just to help with some neural network classifications, one of which could be this project. But then, I have a number of a lot of UAV type work right now that would really benefit from CNN classifications of this rockweed that we're doing, or kelp, or salt marsh vegetation. So I just would like the idea of having of a neural network expert in the house. And again, they could take a big piece of this if we wanted them to. So I haven't made any decisions, but I just wanted to run that by, see what folks thought, if they had any concerns about that, or if maybe it's not necessary, if you guys have released for this project, but that would be one option.
I can jump in a little bit on that because I have sort of the updates from the UMass machine learning side of things. Where we're at right now is that the binary classifier runs, but we're running into cluster architecture issues. So we haven't been able to get a complete, like, large run of more than like a test data set on that. That took so long to get running, mostly because we were working in R and like the Keras R package and stuff, and B, none of us, I mean, Henry and Kyle, you were there, none of us knew what we were doing when we started. So we had to overcome some technical stuff with that. The big one being that by default, it can't handle things that have more than 3 bands, which seemed like a problem. So we now have sort of a custom image generator for Keras that will let us run with like the TIFFs that we want to use here. As far as image segmentation is going, that's another one that in theory runs. I wasn't on this team, so I don't have the exact details on this. They have an example that works, but they're also running into trouble getting it to run on the server. So I think that timeline got a little truncated because that was sort of a class when the summer started. So Jarrett and I have been talking about picking that back up pretty much now that the semester started again. We're trying to get a meeting on the books with our server administrator to get some like direct help on getting things to run, so we can figure out if this is like an issue with our model and our code, or if this is just an idiosyncrasy of the UMass server that or the cluster that we're working on now. So not to be rambly or hand wavy about it, it doesn't quite work, but I think a lot of the tech side has been pushed out of the way. Tom, I think you're a little less in the loop on this. So where we went, we started trying to build our own neural network and talk to a bunch of people, and decided that the better thing to do would be to try to adapt architecture that already exists. So we're taking the ResNet 50 for the binary classifications. We're using the ResNet 50 sort of architecture, and we just put our own classifier at the bottom of that. So most of the work so far has been getting it to accept TIFFs as an input.
Is there a reason why it needs to be in TIFF format? Is that the output that you have from?
That was what we were trying to use as an input,
okay,
so that we could use the complete Landsat scene and get more than just RGB in there.
Yeah, not limiting yourself to the 3 RGB bands or whatever you choose to be the 3 bands.
Yeah. Yeah, it really wasn't like a TIFF versus JPEG issue. It was just that everything was failing once we went above 3 bands. So that was the hard part.
Yeah, probably because a lot of these are just based on color images anyways, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we had to do was just write like a little script that runs inside there that just pulls in the TIFFs and just converts them to big arrays. Like just kind of like raw arrays. So once we figured that out, it wasn't too bad, but getting there was kind of a mess. So I think that kind of fits pretty well with the timeline that you had thrown up there, though. I think if we can get that meeting on our end with our server administrator in the next couple of weeks, we can have a better idea of if this is something we should keep doing ourselves, or if this is something that like we don't know what we're doing and we need to hire somebody or find someone who does.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, cool.
So did that all come out of the like machine learning kind of reading group workshop you guys had put together?
Yeah, so we did 2 semesters of it. The first semester was super raw, and then the second semester we focused in on the deep learning thing and started using the presence absence data from floating forests as our test data set for that. So nice. That's where that came out of.
If you were going to hire someone to help out, do you have any sense of what that like what person, like, is it a postdoc? Is it a technician? Is it a grad student in machine learning?
So I don't have a sense for the timeline, to be totally honest. I don't know if this is a postdoc type project or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you were saying about having it be someone who is explicitly a machine learning person first, not a Kelp person, would be sort of exactly where we want to be on this. Because at this point, we're a bunch of Kelp people that are pretending,
Right.
which is fun, but yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
And then in terms of just like project budgeting, so I have a year of postdoc here at UCLA. Tell me, did you kept some postdoc money there, right? Or did you just so no postdoc money because we had to reduce it?
Reduce the budget, and then all the changes to financials going from UCSB to FUI. Postdocs are incredibly expensive here.
Yeah. So you're still supported for the same amount of time, like 246 or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it should be fine.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think on your side, it's Kate and postdoc funding. And I think some for you. And then there's some for Jarrett and Isaac.
But now that Kate's basically fully funded through JPL, then that frees up a big chunk of money to either support Emily or go towards the postdoc, I guess.
Yeah, however it's best used.
Okay, cool.
Should I keep going? I can jump in. I can do the floating forests quick update too.
Yeah,
sure.
That was a good time. It's pretty fast at this point. So there's the two main workflows right now that we're doing on floating forests. One is kelp on the edge. So Baja's done. New Zealand's up there. I think it's about halfway done. I have to double check. I know Jarrett just processed a bunch of new images. And then the plan next is to go to South America and look at Ecuador and Peru. For urban kelp, which is a little funky because in some cases we're actually backtracking to areas we've looked at, but it's just like one specific row path, or in some cases two, to get a control area. California is done again, which I'm actually happy that we did it once on 1.0 and once on 2.0. Tasmania, again, almost done again. I have one more round of Landsat 7 to push through there. That's another one. I'm really glad we're running it both ways because I think the data from 1.0 is probably almost unusable. Up next, my current plan is to go Argentina and then Chile, because I also want to do New Zealand, but that's up in the kelp on the edge workflow. But that order can be changed if we need floating forests training data for a particular area or something like that. We can definitely sort of flip up the order on that. So I think we'll have a better sense of how long that will take. We rewrote the image pre-processing script, so I think the plan is just process like all of the imagery that we have left in the pipeline, period. So when we get it up there, we have like a nice progress marker for like until the project is actually done, or at least until that data is actually done. But that's the plan there. And then just as a side note, actually mostly what I've been focusing on is the collaboration with Zooniverse to create classroom curricula with this. So that's sort of the last part of that. And that went super well. We developed a lab for undergrads. We pilot tested for 2 semesters at 7 universities. And we're writing the manuscript now. We're trying to publish it hopefully October in Journal for Geophysical Education. And it was awesome. We got really nice results.
Cool.
Just completing like our one activity, students improved on data literacy, climate change understanding, the capacity to contribute through science, through citizen science. We also found some really cool results when we dug into the demographics of the students that participated. So we saw some interesting things shake out with respect to like trust in the scientific process changing in groups that that in the literature traditionally have not been very trusting of the scientific process. So I know it's a little bit of a side thing from this project, but it's sort of the last part of floating forest, and it's been really cool to work on that. So
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are these where are the schools?
So they were across the country. I can pull up the complete list, but it was UMass, it was ASU, it was George Washington, it was Shaw, and then there were a few smaller ones that I can't remember the names right now. Yeah, we had about 1,200 students participate,
Oh, wow.
which was cool. Yeah,
Cool.
went really well.
That's nice. That's great.
And so that's getting published. The actual module is getting written up by Zooniverse now, and it'll be available like online, sort of directly attached to the Floating Forest page. So that'll be cool too.
Cool. That's awesome.
Mhm.
I guess moving forward, looking at time, maybe I'll skip my little presentation I had, but I guess I guess we did the deep learning things for E.
And maybe, I don't know if Kate
May
can-
not, maybe she wants to give
is-
an update, a verbal update on.
Yeah, maybe she has a verbal update. I mean, basically, like she's made some I think really intriguing progress applying it to Planet. And so yeah, there's some cool preliminary results. She's been able to run it on Planet.
As I was just gonna say, I mean, I already have it built, so I was thinking, would it be worth it to just throw in some of the classifications from the binary decision tree into it and just see like preliminary with Landsat what it looks like? Just
I
on
think
the same
so.
network I built for Planet.
Yeah, for sure. You could either way, you talk to Isaac and try to use some floating forests data or some of the other existing data for Southern California.
Polygon from the undergrads, Kyle, when you were doing your dissertation.
Sorry, you're breaking up.
Do you still have the polygons that the undergrads drew, like for the Landsat scenes during your dissertation?
I don't know. I have no idea where they're in data, like some closeted data in UCSB.
Okay. I mean, it's not, I just wasn't sure, just as whatever, but there's a ton of stuff just on our server, even just from the MATLAB outputs that we could use, or I don't know if Isaac has stuff, but it's not any work, it's already built, so if I just run it through and see what happens.
I think it's worth try. I think you should definitely connect with Isaac and see some of the stuff that they've cleaned and are using for their structure. Just start with that.
Yeah, because I think at least the bottleneck with Planet right now is that we need more training data, like a little bit more like diversity, I guess, and then just like slightly bigger computer specs to tweak some of the settings to make it a bit more powerful. But I think in terms of the structure, it's pretty similar to a lot of the ones that are currently being published. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I
it
think
might be frozen.
let's do. We have tons of validation between the existing data sets up on LTER, the floating forests, and the other stuff that we've done. So I think you should give it a first crack and see what the Landsat output looks like. But yeah, if you don't mind, maybe set up a time to chat with Isaac and start by using their floating forests.
Yeah, sounds good.
And Kate's going to be gone this week and next week, so that'll be something. Maybe we'll touch base with you at the end of the month, Isaac.
That'll be good timing, I think, because we'll be hopefully kind of spun back up on our classifier too. So
Cool.
Sounds like the timelines line up.
Cool. Well, just to give you my quick update, we had a meeting with Washington DNR last week, which I was not looking forward to, but they had looked at some of the Kelp Watch data and were like, had some understandable criticisms and some not so understandable criticisms of the data. It seems, pouring back into the what we've been calling kelp area, especially as it applies to Nereo. I kind of went back and looked through Dennis Finger's paper quite a bit, and back through the Sarah Hamilton's paper, which we worked on. because what we had found in Sarah Hamilton's paper is like a one-to-one relationship between the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife high resolution imagery and the MESMA fractions. That was actually surprisingly good. It kind of surprised me. And looking at Dennis Finger's paper, as well as some of the work we've been doing on Kelp Watch in Northern California, comparing to the CDFW data, we were finding that the dynamics were similar, but that we were vastly underestimating the area. And what I think it is that the way that California and Oregon present their kelp area data, well, I think California actually does a better job of it than Oregon does, but it seems to be more kind of complete, that like an area is like a presence absence map of kelp canopy area. And what we're looking at with Landsat is kind of the emergent canopy area. And that is, and because Oregon was using, they gave us the direct near infrared color imagery, we really isolated, when we classified those high resolution imagery, we isolated that emergent fraction, which would be the stipe and the pneumatocysts from bull kelp, versus all the blades, which may sit kind of underwater a little bit. And so we found really good matchups. When Dennis Finger compared the Landsat data to the California data, which was more presence absence over large areas, they found, and Henry, I think you're on that paper too, right? Yeah, that when you were to make a thematic Landsat map and say a pixel either contains kelp canopy or not, that was a much closer relationship to area in California than if you use the MESMA fractions. And that was similar to what we saw in Washington too. So if you were to just take a chunk of coastline and sum the canopy area and compare it to a chunk of coastline of the Washington data, they saw like a vast underestimate. However, when you plot the pixels where kelp was identified onto high resolution imagery in Washington, we saw that we were capturing the vast majority of area. And so if we basically just use presence absence and called each pixel 900 square meters, we were in the same, we were pretty close to their total area. And so I think, this has kind of created some questions on how we want to serve the data on Kelp Watch. It never used to be a problem before because we were so interested in looking at the dynamics of kelp that we never really, worried what your definition of kelp area was. As long as we were getting the dynamics right, it was going up at the same time and down at the same time over chunks of coastline. It didn't really matter because we were looking at what was affecting the dynamics. But with Kelp Watch, and this may be important for this project too, depending on who uses the data. If it's just scientists interested in dynamics, it probably doesn't matter. But if it is managers that are looking at, harvest quotas and stuff, and having, a standardized unit of area and defining what area we're actually measuring is important. And so I think it's just important to keep that in mind as we move forward. If we move towards using a thematic map, I think it becomes less of an issue. But there's always going to be we should always keep in the back of our minds, like, areas where kelp might be drawn down by currents more often. One of the issues we had with serving the quarterly means is that areas that are more affected by current are going to have a lot more zeros, and it's going to push down that mean through time. So, one thing we might do is show the maximum observed during that quarter, as well as, like a presence absence of canopy area. So those are just some updates on where we are kind of with the kelp data set and how it relates to Kelp Watch and how it relates to, the users of these data in the future. I think the meeting actually went pretty well. we established some, Helen Berry, who kind of first raised the concerns, has actually been very, I mean, I think she did exactly what she was supposed to do. She looked at the data and compared it to data she had, and she's been very reasonable. Not everybody has been quite so reasonable, but Helen and I think we're going to move forward and hopefully get access to some of the original data from Washington to kind of do some of these matchups. And I think that'll be useful for this project as well. Cool. So yeah, I had, form tasks and milestones. I think that might be best left to our next meeting. I know I have a meeting coming up at 3 and other people do as well. Sorry, 3 for me and Isaac, and noon for everybody else. Well, not for Henry. It's probably night there. And I think we have some next steps here. We're going to wait for Henry to kind of finalize some bits of the code, but I think each looking at a region, identifying some pain points will be good. I'm going to keep working on the coastal landmass. I put together some code for that already, and kind of, seeing how automated we can get this. Do we have to select imagery that's already cloud free? How often are we going to get a good low tide image when we use that? I'll also start investigating some more of the random forest and kind of put together a guidebook on making regional random forest models that hopefully we can combine into some more general random forest, and we can see how much that improves over the binary decision tree. Hopefully it does. I have implemented random forest before for Landsat data in a completely unrelated project looking at prairie pothole ponds in Canada, and it worked really well. I was very, very happy with it. So is there any other comments on this before we sign off for the day?
I'll keep going. I'll try and get the binary classifier as well as the segmentation stuff up and running, either working for our next meeting or at least like a tangible update on that.
Cool. And I agree. I've been kind of out of the loop with the deep learning stuff you guys are doing. So, I'll email everybody in the next couple of days to kind of set up the next meeting. I know I'll be out most of next week, as will Kyle and Kate. We'll be doing some drone surveys, and everybody needs a couple of weeks to get stuff. It sounds like there's, between Henry and Isaac getting some stuff going. Maybe for the next meeting I'm guessing early October might be good. And maybe Isaac, if you can put together like just 3 or 4 slides to kind of go over what the main processing steps are, I think it would just be helpful for me just to like understand exactly how this works and where we're at. Maybe a future vision
for the deep. For the deep learning stuff, for the neural nets.
Because I'm really interested in it, and I'd like to start applying this more to other projects too.
Yeah, and I can walk through our code locally too, and just run with a couple of images too, so you can see the whole, cool. Everyone can see the whole everything.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting. Cool. And then what are you running? What kind of is this running in a specific language?
Well, that was sort of the problem originally. Basically everything, like TensorFlow works best with Python, obviously, but we're using an R wrapper for it.
Okay.
So we're doing it in R, but it's basically Python code running through R.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. We're really excited to get this thing going. This has been kind of something we've been talking about for probably like 5 or 6 years at this point. So
awesome.
It'll be the second time NASA's funding someone to do this, so we've got to get it right.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks everybody, and I'll probably see a couple. Kyle, you're going to be at that meeting in a few minutes.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome.
I don't know if you caught my chat too. I'm gonna probably have to check in about some actual floating forest stuff soon. It's time to get the data up onto a DAC, so I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page with exactly what we're submitting and how, sort of exactly that conversation we were just having about what the products look like.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. And some of that may be useful to think about as we end up moving our data in the future onto a DAC as well. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. And Kate, good luck on the Central Coast. Where are you right now?
Somewhere on the 5.
Oh, you're on the 5-5. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Driving to it. Cool. Well, I'll see you next week.
See you in a couple days.
Yep. Cool. Bye, everybody.
So yeah.
Thanks,
Everybody.
Thanks.